Welcome to the very first episode of the Kori J Podcast. I'm very excited to get this podcast rolling. I've been watching and analyzing the NBA over the past 20 years. This podcast is going to give you the latest and greatest sports debates that happen every day in the barbershop. And I'm going to be talking about all the hottest sports topics that happen throughout the year as well. So let's jump right into it. In episode 1, I am going to be discussing the NBA Offseason and all the chaos that has happened this summer. I got to talk about Kawhi Leonard being traded to the Toronto Raptors, Lebron James going to the LA Lakers, Demarcus Cousins choosing the Golden State Warriors, and also what's going on with Carmelo Anthony and where will he end up? So let's begin. Kawhi Leonard traded to the Toronto Raptors. Him, along with Danny Green, was sent to Toronto in exchange for DeMar DeRozan, Jakob Poeltl, a young developing center, and a 2019 top 20 protected first-round pick. So before I get into breaking down the actual trade, let's just take a deep dive back into the history of the San Antonio Spurs. For a long time now, ever since Tim Duncan was drafted to the Spurs, they have always been the model organization. This is a franchise that is well respected throughout the NBA community. They have won 5 championships throughout their dynasty with Coach Greg Popovich. And, Tim Duncan and David Robinson, they sort of built that foundation of the San Antonio Spurs and, what they represent, along with guys such as Tony Parker and Manu Ginobili, who came along later and helped them win championships. But let's talk about Kawhi Leonard. For a while now, he's had this reputation as this silent assassin. He's just strictly focused on basketball and doing what it takes on the court to help his team win. But in recent news, I would say his public perception has sort of changed. Kawhi, I've seen a lot of people bashing Kawhi lately, calling him a diva, and, he's holding the Spurs hostage. And it's just, to me, crazy how his reputation has took such a drastic change from being this quiet killer to this troublesome superstar. And, this is unheard of territory for the San Antonio Spurs to be in a controversy with their best player in Kawhi Leonard. The Spurs have never had this type of backlash in the media throughout their history, so this is a first. And let me just talk about Kawhi. Kawhi, to me, he's a top 5 player in the NBA. This is before the injury. I still think he will be a top 5 player after his injury. And, there were reports throughout the season that Kawhi was upset with the Spurs because they misdiagnosed his injury. And, Kawhi had decided to use his own medical team instead of the San Antonio Spurs medical team to sort of recover throughout the injury process. And meanwhile, on the Spurs side, they were sort of getting antsy about when Kawhi Leonard was going to return. So after the Spurs couldn't seem to get to Kawhi privately, they started putting things in the media. There was clearly a noticeable disconnection between Greg Popovich and the San Antonio Spurs and Kawhi's camp. Popovich would say things in the media such as, "Oh, you have to go question Kawhi's team because we don't have an answer for you. You got to go talk to Kawhi and his people." And Popovich would say these things publicly, and even Kawhi's own teammates began to call him out. Manu Ginobili was questioning the severity of his injury, and Tony Parker said, his own injury was 1,000 times worse than what Kawhi is experiencing right now. So these are some pretty strong accusations, especially coming from your own teammates. So I just knew from that moment on that, the relationship would never be the same, and that for the first time, the Spurs were going to have to trade their top superstar. Now let's look at things from the Raptors' point of view. The Raptors, they've kind of been a playoff flop for the past few years now. They they couldn't. I mean, it's not a bad thing to say this, but they couldn't get by LeBron James, and they shrunk at the sight of seeing LeBron James every year in the playoffs, and they were a franchise that was sort of stuck in that same spot of slaying that dragon. They weren't getting any better, despite having more regular season success in the playoffs. They just couldn't get past that giant in LeBron James. So from the Raptors' point of view, you have your greatest season in franchise history last season and winning 59 games. They were the number one seed in the East. And, things look like they might be, advancing to the Eastern Conference Finals this year and finally slaying the LeBron James team and the Cavaliers team that weren't as good as previous years, So they play in the second round. They get swept by a pretty inferior Cavs team, I would say. And, you can't keep a team like that together. That just it seems like a mental hurdle for them when it comes to LeBron James. So I understand from the Raptors GM perspective, Masai Ujiri, him saying we need to do something different other than standing pat and, letting Kyle Lowry and DeMar DeRozan be our centerpiece for the Toronto franchise. And I don't necessarily agree with the firing of Dwayne Casey, a guy who had just won Coach of the Year. I do think Dwayne Casey is a good coach, and I'm glad the Detroit Pistons picked him up. But I do understand, sort of putting a fresh voice in the locker room. But I don't agree with, the Raptors. They hired their assistant coach, Nick Nurse. I don't know too much about the guy, but we'll find out this season how good of a coach he is. But I do think they sort of looked outside of the organization to find their next head coach. But moving on from that, it was pretty cold-blooded to trade DeMar DeRozan to San Antonio, man. This is a guy who loved Toronto. He's a very good dude. He did a lot of things in the community. And he loved being in Toronto. And he had his best friend there in Kyle Lowry. And if you just look at the Raptors' history in the franchise, look at all the stars that played for Toronto. Vince Carter had some good years there, and he left. Tracy McGrady was there. He left. Chris Bosh was the franchise leader in points before DeMar DeRozan. He left. And then you get a guy in DeMar that wants to stay in Toronto and embraces being the franchise player for the Raptors. And you trade him for what will likely be a rental in Kawhi Leonard. I mean, it's pretty tough. It's a business. We understand there's no loyalty in any sport. We've seen it with Isaiah Thomas being traded after playing in games after his sister died. It's no loyalty in sports. We understand that. But, man, that was tough right there. Just to, I understand DeMar DeRozan being frustrated, especially after it was reported that they told him that they wouldn't trade him. You just really can't believe anybody these days. It's no loyalty. They're just going to do what's best for the team. But let's get into who I think won the trade. I mean, so you got Danny Green and Kawhi Leonard headed to the Raptors. And, of course, DeRozan, Jakob Poeltl, and the 2019 top 20 protected pick going to the Spurs. I've seen a lot of people say, the Raptors lost the trade because Kawhi is probably going to be a rental and they're going to lose him after a year. But honestly, I still think they won the trade, even with the possibility of Kawhi Leonard leaving the next year. I mean, if you look at it, they weren't going to go anywhere anyway with DeMar DeRozan being the best player on the team. He's an all-star. He's not a superstar. He's a good player, but he's not going to, get the franchise. He's not a carry the franchise over the hump type of guy. You know what I'm saying? So, they had to do something other than, doing the same thing over and over again and coming up short with the same players. So, they traded for a top 5 player in Kawhi Leonard. And if he does play the whole year, they're going to be a contender in the East. And I think I would put them second behind the Boston Celtics. If Kawhi Leonard comes back and he's that same player that he was before, they're going to be a legitimate threat. But I think the Raptors, they wanted to get away from that DeMar DeRozan contract. It looks good trading for Kawhi Leonard, but I think they didn't want to be tied to DeMar DeRozan for the next 3 years that he had on his contract. And they just wanted to move on from that. But even if Kawhi Leonard does decide to leave the Raptors next summer, or maybe even at the trade deadline, you never know what might happen. They could receive an offer at the trade deadline that, they're interested in and that they move him for. If they already know or got the feeling that Kawhi is not going to stay the whole season, they can always move him at the trade deadline and still get something for him. So I don't think the Raptors are dead in the water just because Kawhi may potentially leave and it was reported that he didn't even want to be in Toronto, But if you look at what they gave up in the trade, I mean, yes, DeMar DeRozan is an all-star, all-NBA player, but it's not Kawhi Leonard. They gave up Jakob Poeltl. He's a good young center. He had some flashes in the playoffs, but I would say he's probably their fifth best young asset. He's not as valuable as some of the other young guys they got, such as Fred VanVleet, DeLon Wright. I mean, they had Pascal Siakam, OG. They have plenty of other players that they held on to in that trade. And the Raptors had the best bench, one of the best benches in the NBA last year. And they kept most of that bench and added Danny Green and Kawhi Leonard. And Danny Green is another underrated piece that was huge in this trade, I think. He's a 3-and-D type player. I know he's getting up there in age, but he's still a very contributive player. And he's going to help Toronto out, especially with his three-point shooting and, spacing the floor, some things that Toronto has struggled with in previous years. So I really like this trade for the Raptors. And even if Kawhi Leonard leaves next summer, they're going to have a ton of cap space. The 2019 free agent class is a very good one, and I'll get to that in another episode, but they're going to have cap space to sign possibly another star or multiple good players, so they can still improve on what they already have. They have some good young talent there already, so I like the move for Toronto. You have to take this risk if you're the Raptors because they were borderline close to falling into the bottom of the league again, and being stuck in mediocrity. So you have to take that gamble if you're the Raptors, and I think if Kawhi stays the whole season, they would be a very competitive team in the Eastern Conference. Now, let's get to the San Antonio Spurs side of things. Yes, they got back an all-NBA type player, an all-star, and DeMar DeRozan. And Jakob Poeltl, Popovich loves the foreign guys with Jakob Poeltl. And they got the pick, which will likely be converted this year if the Raptors finish with a top 10 record. So they will get that first round pick, I believe. But, man, this is a tough trade for the Spurs. To give up Kawhi Leonard. And, again, I like DeMar DeRozan, but he doesn't have a good reputation as a playoff performer. And he has often underperformed in the playoffs. So it'll be interesting to see how him and Greg Popovich sort of develop their relationship. But the Spurs, I don't really know how this is going to fit as far as the starting lineup. I expect DeJounte Murray to start for the Spurs, now that Tony Parker's gone and he went to the Hornets. They have DeJounte Murray, Patty Mills as their point guards, and then, I would think DeMar DeRozan would start at the shooting guard position. The small forward position, maybe Rudy Gay starts, or maybe they start Bellinelli to provide more shooting. They did get Bellinelli back, who left the Philadelphia 76ers. But my idea of their starting lineup would be Murray, DeRozan, Rudy Gay, LaMarcus Aldridge, and maybe Paul Gasol or Jakob Poeltl. Maybe I don't know. I don't know if they're gonna go big or they're gonna go small. But if that's your starting lineup, there's not a lot of 3-point shooting in that lineup. So I think it'll be very different from what Greg Popovich has had to coach over the years. You know, usually a space and play team. You know, moving the ball really well, hitting 3-pointers, getting open cuts to the lane. But it's not going to be as easy to do that with more mid-range shooter guys in DeRozan and Aldridge, and not a lot of 3-point shooting in that lineup with Murray, DeRozan, Gay, Aldridge, and potentially Gasol or whoever the big may be. So I think that would definitely be interesting in terms of the fit of these guys. I mean, we know DeRozan is a good player and Pop is going to get the best out of him, but I think the Spurs are the clear loser in this trade. You know, of course, I'm not picking them not to make the playoffs. They're going to make the playoffs because, in my opinion, Greg Popovich is the greatest coach ever. But it's going to be very different for the San Antonio Spurs, and this could be the beginning of the end of the Spurs dynasty. You know, Greg Popovich is not going to coach forever. You know, he's getting up there in age as well. So I don't know. These next 2 or 3 years may be it for Greg Popovich, and who knows what's going to happen with the Spurs. But we will see. Moving on to the biggest all-season news we had this summer. LeBron James headed to the LA Lakers. Showtime is back in LA. I mean, you can't get much closer to Magic Johnson than LeBron James, man. This is Magic 2.0, So I think it definitely will be exciting for the league to have the Lakers back being, a good team. And it's going to definitely be an interesting season for the Lakers. I mean, if you look at some of the additions that they had along with LeBron James, I know there's been a lot of jokes about the meme team with the Lakers adding Rajon Rondo, Lance Stevenson, JaVale McGee, and even the most recent acquisition, Michael Beasley. So I'll get into that in a minute on how these players will fit with the Lakers. But let's analyze LeBron James' actual decision, because I have some interesting opinions about this. A lot of people seem to think that this decision is strictly a business decision, because we know, LA is associated with Hollywood, and this will allow LeBron James to embark on his movie career and build his brand even stronger. And part of that may be true, LeBron James is a businessman. He gets to learn from a really good businessman in Magic Johnson, who owns several franchises already. So their relationship definitely plays a part into that. I'm not going to deny that. But let me give you my take on why this is a basketball decision as much as it is a business decision. Let's look at the Lakers roster that was there before LeBron James' arrival. I mean, you have a young point guard and Lonzo Ball, who I think unfairly took some criticism this year because of some of the things that LeVar Ball said. But he had a solid rookie year, I believe. You have Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, who resigned this summer on a 1-year, $12 million deal. And it's sort of a 3-and-D player. He shares the same agent as LeBron James. So maybe he had some sort of connection on helping get LeBron to the Lakers. But moving on from that, you got Brandon Ingram, a talented scoring wing who averaged 16 points a game last year and is only 20 years old. You got Kyle Kuzma, who also had a really good rookie campaign, averaging around 16 points and being a contributor. And Josh Hart, who may not be a common household name, but he won the Summer League MVP this summer and has really made some good progressions into his game coming into year 2. So I think that'll definitely be interesting to see who was the starter between him and KCP. But moving on, and you got to give the Lakers scouting team and front office a lot of credit for how they drafted over these past few years as well. I mean, you know, they got Josh Hart pretty late in the first round. They got Kyle Kuzma late in the first round as well from the Brooklyn pick that they had. I mean, this year you got Mo Wagner late in the first round, who I think was a sort of an underrated college player. And this guy, Mikhailu, I don't know if you guys have been watching Summer League, but he's looking like a steal at the 47th pick. I mean, the guy can shoot. He's a good athlete. So they've done a good job of drafting some young talent and, you know, to attract a superstar like LeBron James. And I'm not sure if you all have been listening to some of the interviews that Magic has done, but Magic said in his conversation with LeBron James that, you know, LeBron wanted to play with this young core of players, and, you know, he thought that, you know, looking at the success that Boston had last year and a team like Utah, who had Donovan Mitchell, a rookie, you know, leading a team in the playoffs, and Boston, who had guys like Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, Terry Rozier, you know, these guys got far in the playoffs. They made it all the way to the Eastern Conference Finals without Kyrie Irving. And these were young guys as well. You know, just because they're young doesn't mean you can't play well in the playoffs or in the regular season. So I think that's something that definitely attracted LeBron James, you know, the young talent the Lakers already had. But let's get into some of the free agent signings they made. Rajon Rondo, Lance Stevenson, JaVale McGee, Michael Beasley. It's a lot of jokes flying around about this team, right? I mean, you gotta admit, it's gonna be entertaining seeing Lance Stevenson playing with LeBron James after blowing in his ear. And, you know, seeing how Rajon Rondo and LeBron James fit together, who are both two of the smartest guys in the league, by the way. They have very high basketball IQs. So I think that's going to be a huge benefit for those young guys, being able to learn from Rondo and LeBron James. And also, I mean, JaVale McGee, he gets joked about a lot. You know, Shaq and the Fool MVP. He kind of, he has a lot of highlight plays as far as doing a lot of dumb things. But if you actually watch, you know, he was a good contributor for the Warriors throughout most of the season. You know, he's a tremendous athlete, and this has been the case before he even joined the Warriors. This guy's a freakish athlete. He's in a dunk contest. He's a rim runner. He can block shots at the rim. You know, he's a legit 7-footer, and he's great being a alley-oop finisher. You know, and catching lobs because he has a crazy wingspan and length. But also, the most recent addition, Michael Beasley, another guy whose kind of reputation in the media is knucklehead or a guy that failed because he was number 2 pick in the draft back in the Derrick Rose draft, where Michael Beasley went number 2. So I kind of understand the expectations being lowered for Beasley considering the way his career turned out. But Michael Beasley has always been a talented player. You know, I think it's kind of funny that people are laughing at the signing for a guy like Beasley, who had a really quiet, underrated year with the Knicks last year. You know, he averaged around 13, 14 points a game, shot 50% from the field, and even shot 39% from the three, which is pretty good, you know. And let me say something about all of these free agent signings that the Lakers made. These are, I mean, with the exception of Rondo and JaVale, who may play more minutes in the starting lineup, but most of these guys are 8th, 9th, 10th guys in the rotation. I mean, these are not going to be starters. Guys like Lance Stevenson and Michael Beasley, they're not going to be starting. The Lakers' young core is going to be the core along with LeBron James. I mean, I project the starting lineup of Lonzo Ball. I think Josh Hart's going to win over that starting 2-guard spot. Brandon Ingram's probably going to start at the 3 position. LeBron James is going to play the 4, I believe. And maybe they start off with JaVale McGee and play small ball in the game. But, you know, Lance Stevenson and Beasley and JaVale, these guys aren't going to be playing 30-plus minutes. You know, they're going to be played sparingly, you know, 10-minute spurts, 15-minute spurts or whatever the case may be, situational based players. You know what I'm saying? These guys are not part of the Lakers quote unquote core. So when people, make jokes about the meme team, just remember that they're more end of the bench players, you know what I'm saying, that's going to contribute on a situational basis in need. So just to get that out the way. Now, for those that don't know, the Los Angeles Lakers, they were a top 10 defense last season for most of the season until Isaiah Thomas came. But we know why the defense fell off because of that. But the Lakers are a good defensive team. If you compare them to the Cleveland Cavaliers team that LeBron James had last year, I mean, they were at the bottom of the league in defense, They were a much worse defensive team than the Lakers without LeBron James. So I think he's coming into a much better situation. This roster is clearly better than the Cleveland roster that he had last year. With the exception of Kevin Love, the roster wasn't that good outside of that. I mean, let's make a comparison. Who was a better player last season? J.R. Smith or Michael Beasley? In my opinion, it's Michael Beasley. He's a better player than J.R. Smith. He just is. George Hill, Rajon Rondo. I'll take Rajon Rondo over George Hill. And these are guys that are going to be coming off the bench for the Lakers. Rondo's probably not going to be a starter. Maybe a mentor for Lonzo Ball. And coming off the bench there, Beasley's not going to be a starter. He's probably a ninth guy off the bench or whatever the case, whatever Luke Walton decides with the rotation. But these guys will be coming off the bench. They won't be starting like they were on the Cleveland Cavaliers roster that LeBron James carried to an NBA Finals appearance. So I think the Lakers did a smart thing by signing a bunch of guys to one-year deals as they want to maintain their cap flexibility for next year's free agent class in 2019, where you could potentially get Kawhi Leonard, Klay Thompson, Jimmy Butler, and so many superstars in that 2019 free agent class. And another thing I wanted to address, people think, you really think a LeBron James team is going to mail it in for a season? I mean, you can never count out a team with LeBron James on. I'm just going to say that. Listen to everything that Magic has been saying. They're not planning on sitting on their asses this season. They're going to go out and compete. And they sign competitors. Look at the guys they signed. Rajon Rondo is a competitor. Lance Stevenson, despite all the antics that he's done and the reputation that he has, he's going to go out there and compete. Michael Beasley is going to compete. LeBron James is going to compete, along with the core players that they already have. And Ingram, Lonzo Ball, Hart, Kuzma. They have a lot of talent on the roster, even if some of it is still untapped potential, So I can't see the logic in people saying this is just a throwaway year. You never know what can happen in the NBA season. Things are unpredictable, so I can't, let that narrative fly that LeBron James is just taking a season off and waiting till next year to try to compete for a championship. No, they're going to go for it this year with the pieces that they have. They have tradable assets that they can still move around the trade deadline, which is why they have a lot of one-year deals, which teams will easily take at the trade deadline because they come off the books at the end of the season. And I know for certain this is not going to be the final Lakers roster. It's very funny. I agree with the mean team jokes and the way the roster is constructed right now. But I'm not going to count out Magic Johnson and LeBron James, whatever plan that they discuss in their free agency meeting. I'm sure they have a plan going forward on what they want to do. So this is not going to be the final roster when playoff time comes around. There's plenty of opportunities for a trade to be made. They have their core in place to build throughout the season and get stronger as the season goes along. So I'm not going to count out this team and just write them off as, they're taking a year off. Listen, no one's probably going to be the Golden State Warriors. And I'll get to that in a second with the addition of Demarcus Cousins. But I don't think this is a throwaway season as some have suggested. Just because you don't make the final doesn't mean it's a throwaway season. You have to build something before you can become a championship team, and that's what Magic Johnson and LeBron James are trying to do. So we will see. I mean, right now, with the currently constructed roster, I think the Lakers could easily be a 4 or 5 seed in the Western Conference. Depending on how these guys develop around LeBron James, and having LeBron James there accelerates that growth process for some of the younger core that they have, and it's gonna be exciting to watch. That's all I'm gonna say. Moving on to the next topic, Carmelo Anthony was recently traded to the Atlanta Hawks from the Oklahoma City Thunder, and this move is just a move to release Carmelo Anthony so he can go into his free agency as well. Atlanta sent Dennis Schroeder to the Oklahoma City Thunder, which I thought was a great pickup for the Thunder, and they did a good job in being able to find a trade partner for Carmelo Anthony, as this trade saved them close to $100 million in the luxury tax and allowed them to pick up, a solid player in Dennis Schroeder along as well by doing the trade. So kudos to Sam Presti, the Oklahoma City Thunder GM, for pulling off this trade. Now, Carmelo Anthony, he's an Atlanta Hawk for the time being, but he will be bought out or waived by the Hawks. And all indications point to Carmelo signing with the Houston Rockets. So, it'll be interesting to see how Houston does this upcoming season. I mean, they lost a guy, Trevor Ariza, who's a really glue type of guy. They lost Luke Mbah-a-Moute, who was important in creating their switchable defense, where they switch everything. So it's definitely going to be interesting to see how Houston performs this upcoming season. 'Cause I'm not so sure that they're going to be better than they were last year. I think they had their championship window to beat the Golden State Warriors, and unfortunately, Chris Paul suffered his injury. So I don't know if Houston can repeat that success that they had last season. I mean, just looking from a general scope, of course, Carmelo Anthony, he's a more talented player than Trevor Ariza was, but in terms of fit, will Carmelo Anthony be willing to play his role along with Chris Paul and James Harden? I mean, let's look at Carmelo Anthony's career here now. He's recently traded from the Denver Nuggets to the New York Knicks. He had some really good seasons in Denver and New York, particularly when Jason Kidd was there in New York, and they had that really good season, went to the second round of the playoffs. But if we're being honest, over the last 4 years, Carmelo Anthony has been on the decline. He's not the player that he once was. He still thinks he is that in his mind, and that's the difference between him and Dwayne Wade. Dwayne Wade has always been willing to sacrifice throughout his career. When LeBron James came to Miami, Dwayne Wade made that sacrifice to hand the keys over to LeBron James. And, he had no problem coming off the bench as he aged in his career, with the Chicago Bulls and even on the Miami Heat now. Dwayne Wade has always sacrificed to, make the team better. Carmelo Anthony, on the other hand, he doesn't seem interested in making that same sacrifices. It's all about him. When he first came to the Oklahoma City Thunder, it was suggested that he come off the bench, and he laughed at oh, me come off the bench? Come on now. But, it's all about Carmelo getting his, and he's just not a team player, man. I don't know how he's going to fit in Houston, being asked to play a certain role. And maybe he proves me wrong. He does have a lot to prove this season after the season that he had last year. But, playing with Chris Paul is going to help Carmelo. He is one of the best floor generals in the league, along with James Harden. But Carmelo is really going to have to buy into his role in Houston, because you had guys there that played defense in Ariza and Mbah-a-Moute. And Melo's not a defender. So we're going to see how it turns out in Houston. And if he does end up there, all indications point that Carmelo will sign with the Houston Rockets. But That's going to definitely be an experiment to see if he buys into that role and playing with Coach Mike D'Antoni, who he had problems with when he was in New York. So we'll see how that relationship develops, and if Carmelo Anthony can sort of recreate some of that magic that he had earlier in his career. So that's to be determined, and we will find out. Moving on to Demarcus Cousins joining the Golden State Warriors. I mean, just when you thought the rich couldn't get any richer, right? I mean, they got 4 All-Stars all in the prime of their career, 4 NBA caliber players, and then they add a 5th in Demarcus Cousins after winning the championship in sweeping fashion. Man, hey, you got to give kudos to the Golden State Warriors organization, man. They are clearly ahead of the pack. They have built a culture there where guys want to come play with them. And they are the beasts of the league right now. You know, everybody's trying to figure out how can we beat the Golden State Warriors, and they've earned that right. You know, and with DeMarcus Cousins making that decision to join them, there has been some speculation on Cousins' decision to join the Warriors. You know, me personally, I don't like the decision, but it has been reported. You know, from Cousins' standpoint, he says that, you know, no teams offered him any contract, and going to the Warriors was his ace of spades that he had in his back pocket, you know, because nobody, quote unquote, offered him any contracts. But there has been conflicting reports. This report came out from a New Orleans Pelicans beat writer that said the Pelicans offered Cousins a 2-year, $40 million deal that he turned down towards the end of the season. And this was after, you know, he had already torn his Achilles, so I thought that was interesting. He turned down a potential $40 million deal after tearing your Achilles. Anyway, you know, as we all know, the Achilles is a very serious injury. You know, it's not a lot of guys that recover from that in their career. You know, the only guy that came back close to what they were was Dominique Wilkins when he tore his Achilles, and you know, he came back still pretty much the same player. But you got other guys such as Kobe Bryant, who's one of the hardest working guys the league has ever seen, and he couldn't quite recover from that torn Achilles injury. So I don't know how a guy like DeMarcus Cousins, you know, how is he going to be the same player when he comes back from that injury? We don't know. And he's also a 7-footer, you know, a bigger guy, weighs more than a Kobe Bryant. So I don't think his body's going to respond, you know, the same way to that Achilles injury. And, you know, he may not even play this season. We'll see how it goes. But I expect DeMarcus Cousins to sit out most of the year, and maybe he's ready for the playoffs. But is he going to be that same player, or can he at least be 70 or 80% of what he was? So I think that's definitely going to be interesting. But the Golden State Warriors, they were already the heavy favorites before they got DeMarcus Cousins. So if Cousins can give you at least 80% of what he gave you last season before the injury, they should run away with the championship this year. I mean, they have 5 All-Stars. This is literally an All-Star team that we are witnessing right now with the Golden State Warriors. And if Cousins can come back and play this year at a respectable level, I see no reason why the Warriors can't three-peat and, you know, win the 3rd championship this year. And I don't think any team could have made a move this offseason to all of a sudden trump the Warriors adding DeMarcus Cousins if he's able to play. Now, if he can't play, again, the Warriors are still the favorites without DeMarcus Cousins. But that opportunity to upset them increases without Cousins compared to having a serviceable DeMarcus Cousins. I mean, that's 5 All-Stars that you have to compete against. No other team has more than 3 All-Stars, you know. So it's the Warriors championship to lose next year. But I do think this upcoming season will definitely be very interesting with the latest roster moves that we have around the league. You know, with Kawhi Leonard going to the Raptors and LeBron James in the West now. and the moves that Oklahoma City made, moves that Houston have made. So it'll definitely be a new set of challenges this season, just to see if anybody can beat the Golden State Warriors when it comes to the playoffs. So we will see what happens after all of these new additions. But it will definitely be a steep slope to climb in beating the Golden State Warriors. So they are definitely the heavy favorites coming into the season. Moving on from the Warriors, I just want to point out a couple other teams that I was impressed with this offseason. The Indiana Pacers. I thought they made some really good, quiet additions this summer by adding Tyreke Evans, 6'6" guy that could handle the ball and sort of take some of the pressure off of Victor Oladipo. They also added Kyle O'Quinn as a backup center, and I think he could really help them in their team. And they drafted a guy in Aaron Holiday who I really liked from the draft. And I think he's going to be a nice defensive point guard that can help them compete. So kudos to the Indiana Pacers. Right now, I would rank them probably fourth in the Eastern Conference, but they're going to definitely be a tough team to beat, and they're going to be a problem in the East. Of course, the Lakers are all-season winners by adding a guy like LeBron James. I mean, that's a once-in-a-generation type player. And despite the moves that some people may have questioned with Rondo and JaVale and Beasley and so on, the Lakers are back. Showtime is back, and it's going to be very exciting to watch this Lakers team with all the different personalities that they have and seeing how they do in terms of where they place in the Western Conference. So that's going to be a story to follow all season. Another team that I've already mentioned, but I think that did a great job with their offseason, Oklahoma City Thunder. They were able to re-sign Paul George, who many thought, might have been headed to LA, but they brought Paul George back on a 4-year deal, so that's great news. They got rid of Carmelo Anthony, which is addition by subtraction, because Carmelo was not a good fit in Oklahoma City, and they were able to trade for a need in Dennis Schroeder, who's going to be the backup point guard for Russell Westbrook. And, I think the Thunder got better this offseason. Along with, they added Nerlens Noel as well, who could play some backup center behind Steven Adams. So I like what the Thunder did this offseason. I think they're going to compete. And, of course, the Raptors adding Kawhi Leonard. I've already said how they're going to be a powerhouse in the East if Kawhi is committed to staying the whole season. If not, again, they can always trade him at the trade deadline and get something for him. But if Kawhi is there throughout the entirety of the season, hey, Boston, you better watch out. Philly, the Raptors will be there to compete and come out the East potentially. So keep an eye on that. And, of course, the biggest winner of the offseason is the Eastern Conference. LeBron James is no longer in the East. He's made the finals for 8 straight years consecutively. And the East is wide open again. I mean, you have teams. I think Boston is probably the favorite out East with with all the talent that they have, and Kyrie Irving and Gordon Hayward coming back. But it's going to be interesting to see who's that next team to take over the Eastern throne with LeBron James gone now. I mean, you got Boston there, Philly, with Embiid and Simmons making their progress and the trades that they made. And, of course, the Toronto Raptors adding Kawhi Leonard. I think Indiana's in the mix. We'll see what happens with the Milwaukee Bucks and the Washington Wizards, who added Dwight Howard. But I think the Eastern Conference will be very interesting next season. And that pretty much wraps up the NBA offseason recap. I want to thank you all for tuning in. And I have a lot more content coming. I'm going to be having guests on the show as well, debating different topics, getting into the seeding for the Eastern and Western Conference in the NBA, and many other things that I want to get into with this podcast. So, again, thank you all for tuning in. If you enjoyed it, leave a like, subscribe, share. Any type of support, I really appreciate it. And feel free to leave a comment. Anything you think I can improve on. This was my first episode, so I will only get better from here. But, feel free to have a discussion in the comment section. You want to debate me on any of the points I made? We can do that too. And stay tuned for the next episode. This is Corey J signing out.